Rachel.
Hi, Brittany.
So we are back with another episode of The Way the World Works. And today, discussing how the world works, I want to talk about my favorite thing in the whole world, which is the American Revolution. That is my absolute favorite thing. My boyfriend knows that if he asks me any question about American history, specifically the Revolution, I just won't stop talking for 2 hours. And he pretends to be interested. Yes. Oh, I just get, and you know, I work in constitutional law, and so that also has to do with that. So I get really excited. But so today that's what I want to talk about.
I consider myself a history buff, but I wouldn't say I know that much about the American Revolution. So maybe you can help educate me.
See, but this is what I love about it, is because there's so much to know. So that I don't even think I know everything. Like, I'm always learning about a new individual that I had never heard about before. Like we talked about it a couple of years ago on the show about the mother of the Tea Party who helped put the paint on the men's faces before they went to the Boston Tea Party and had to hide them and take off little things I've never figured out. But so the episode is not just
the makeup artist.
I would know about the makeup artist. I love makeup. But so today, specifically what I want to talk about, Rachel, is why it still matters. Why does the revolution still matter? Why are you and I sitting here hundreds of years later talking about this war that happened?
Well, why are we, Brittany?
Well, why are we? Because it was the most important thing that ever happened in modern Western history, because it was the fight and the victory for true individualism, a rugged individualism, I would call it. Rugged meaning, you know, we were like this ragtag group of underdogs. And I mean, if you studied it, we should not have won. Let me just say that.
I do know that. And I do know also that it took place in roughly the same era as the French Revolution, which had a lot of very interesting...
Or little before.
Roughly the same time. So there was something really happening in Europe that was causing people to yearn to be free.
Well, it was actually the French, you know, because that was a little after ours, were looking to us because they thought what we did was great. And we had another episode about this years ago where they took our great revolution and they did not do so great. They missed a few key points.
There's a few
but our
things
revolution,
that were,
right. Our revolution really sent a message to the whole world that basically said we're not going to take an oppressive, tyrannical government anymore. We're not going to do it. What's that song? We're not gonna take it.
No.
It was like that.
And the shot heard round the world, really was heard round the world, because it sent a message to tyrants that this is just not going to work anymore. And the British, you correct me if I'm wrong, I'm just telling what I know, but the British, their empire was spread really thin. And yes, they should have won if they devoted all their resources to this one fight, but they had to make some choices about, is it really worth it? And you can't be everywhere all at once, as the British found out. And I mean, that and maybe our ingenuity, like the innovative way that the colonists fought, and also the fact that they were fighting for their homeland and their own farms, made a big difference versus the British were, you know, fighting for what? What were they really fighting for?
Well, and you bring up a really good point. You know, they didn't count on that, right? They didn't count. I think, yes, they were spread too thin, absolutely. But they also didn't expect this silly bunch of Americans, you know, this silly bunch of backwoods Americans, not nearly as proper and educated to win the greatest crown, empire in the world. Yeah. And here they did. And you brought up one of the biggest points about that. And that is because they were fighting for their home. This isn't a military, right? This wasn't like somebody being enlisted in the British military and fighting because they signed up to do that. This was...
And they were forced to and told to.
And forced to. I always think back to the movie The Patriot, which probably too young for our viewers to watch, but someday. But there's...
I was going to ask your opinion on that as a historian of the time.
I love historical fiction, but I watch it knowing it's historical fiction. And I think it's really important because I don't know about you, Rachel, but when I watch a movie, and I probably shouldn't do this, I have my phone in hand and I'm always Googling, was that true? Did that really happen? Because it really, and I start learning. A lot of it was, but in every movie. And then I start learning so much about a topic that I didn't even think I was going to, because the movie start some ideas. But what I like about it is the spirit of the American colonists, and that it wasn't, like I said, it wasn't a military, everybody, people fighting were sometimes just sons and husbands who saw British people on the army on their land and picked up a gun to protect their home. Not even this town they lived in, this, settlement, their home. They were protecting their sons, daughters, sisters, brothers. And so there's something very, very personal about it. And actually, when America, and this is a topic I won't get too in the weeds in now, but went to Vietnam, we found a similar problem, that we weren't fighting a military every day. We were fighting people defending their homes, and we didn't account for that. And then a military...
The tables were turned.
Yep, exactly. We kind of got a taste of our own medicine. But so that was so important that these weren't professional soldiers, and it was because of the idea behind the war. We weren't fighting to maintain empire. We weren't fighting to protect the king's interest. We were fighting because we wanted to be free. We wanted to be treated as individuals. And you think about that, and it's just like, wow. And for our faults, and we have a lot, our country is not perfect. But if you look at other countries' revolutions and look at how many of those constitutions that came from those revolutions are actually still intact, most aren't. So go on.
I think we do take our Constitution for granted. Here in St. Augustine, we have a town plaza. It's called the Constitution Plaza. Ooh. But it's not to the American Constitution. It's to the Spanish Constitution of 1821. And that Constitution lasted, I think, 2 years.
Wow.
It's an interesting story that I give on my historic tours here in St. Augustine.
I would love for us to do an episode on that. Please write that down and remember that. I'd love to hear that.
Yeah, just a note, the Spanish Constitution of 1821 was very short-lived, and then all the monuments that they had built to commemorate this Constitution, they were all ordered torn down, but the one in St. Augustine, we kept it because we thought it was nice. But, we do take our Constitution for granted, that not every country respects the rule of law the same way we do. And it actually is a miracle that it has lasted these 200 and some years.
Almost 250, right? Almost 250, I believe.
Yeah.
We're coming up on, because 2026, which how is that almost 2026 already? Well, it's not, but it kind of is. It feels like it is.
I don't feel a day fast. Over 200.
But I think two of the biggest takeaways of why the revolution still matters is this belief in limited government, this belief in the rule of law, which, we took these ideas from Britain. It's funny because people maybe who don't know a lot about the revolution, or when you're learning it in school, you might think like, oh, these were revolutionary American ideas. And they weren't, because remember, we were British, like we were from Britain. And so these ideas were actually from people like John Locke, from these, old, well, they weren't old then, but, British philosophers. And so we were just fighting to uphold the ideals of the place we came from, things like the Magna Carta, which we've talked about before, and we'll get into again because it's my absolute favorite document ever. In fact, I'm going to go see it in London, and I'm very excited. But so the revolution is still important today because the spirit of limited government, that basically the government has to live within its designated rules, which is the Constitution. It can only do what's in the Constitution. And the fact that individuals and not groups of people are the most important element of the society is incredible. And it's something that is so important today. And we talked about, Rachel, something that is still standing today after, well, the Constitution is not 250 years old, just to make sure we're differentiating right. That revolution, 250 years, and then the Constitution was signed later. In fact, we had the Articles of Confederation first, which I think we're pretty cool. We'll get into that another episode too. There's so much we could talk about, but some overall themes, I want to make sure that we really hit on is limited government, right? The rule of law, because in Britain it was a divine right of kings that basically has your parents, and I don't mean to rat you out, parents, but has your mom ever said because I said so? Or something like that. Rachel, have you ever said because I said so?
I plead the fifth.
That was a good answer. Google, that's your homework assignment, listeners. Google that. That was hilarious. So that was kind of what divine right of kings were. The king would say, well, I'm king. Clearly, God made me king. And therefore, do what I said because I said so, without any backing behind it.
And because, by the way, also God said so, because I am the embodiment of God on the earth. That's how they thought of kings.
It was wild. And, you don't have a very educated, the masses weren't educated. They couldn't even read. And so someone tells you that and you're like, well, I don't know if I'm going to eat if I don't agree with this guy up here. So,
And here's a Shakespearean saying for you. Power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Is that where because we've said that quote a lot on this show. People say that quote all the time in life.
I know.
I did not know it was Shakespeare.
I believe it is. But it might, because a lot of Shakespeare he drew from other sources.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I'm going to say it again and think about it. Power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So that's a big problem that governments have, is when they get too powerful, the temptation to ignore the rule of law and run roughshod over people's rights. Mm-hmm. It becomes too great a temptation. And that's when they have to be put in check.
Yes, they do. And that is where the courts and Congress, and there's all these great checks and balances that keep everyone as contained and pure as we can. And there's one more thing I want to talk about the revolution before we wind up this episode. And that is, and this is this cheesy belief. I get cheesy when it comes to this concept of the American dream, but this opportunity and this fact that you could be anything you wanted to be. You could own property, where maybe in England, because there were land barons, and we'll get into all this, other episodes, but it wasn't as easy as I'm going to buy this plot of land. You had people who had owned that land for so long, you kind of couldn't. But in America, you could buy a piece of land and build your home and raise a family and raise chickens. And Rachel, you used to raise chickens. And you could have this thing that you owned and turn that into whatever you wanted it to be. And a lot of times today, you'll hear people say that this American dream, this thing does not exist anymore. And I very much disagree. It does. The only person I think making it harder, the thing making the American dream harder, is the government doesn't stand out of our way enough. But so when we talk about why the revolution still matters today, that is the thing that always gets me feeling that like warm and fuzzy feeling inside, is that because this ragtag group of men and women, sacrificed so much and stood up to a tyrant, we can be whatever we want here. And we are free. Not as free maybe as we should be. It's not perfect. But yeah, so we will leave it there. As always, guys, don't forget to like and subscribe to our podcast and share it with friends. And also, Rachel and I want to know what you guys think. We want to know, was this topic boring? Would you want to hear more about this topic? Is there something you really want us to talk about? We're called The Way the World Works, so we can talk about pretty much anything because it kind of encompasses.
Questions. Right? Ask us anything.
Ask us anything. So yeah, until next time, Rachel, we'll talk to you later.
Until next time.